My twin spent 3 months pretending to be me. Maxed out credit cards in my name. Left taunting notes after breaking in, then showed up with a lawyer demanding I owe her. So I pulled an Uno reverse in the most devastating way possible. N people always say having a twin is like having a built-in best friend. N maybe that's true for most people. N for me, having a twin meant spending 34 years watching someone who looked exactly like me destroy everything she touched, then somehow convincing everyone else that I was the problem. N my name is Claire. N am I identical? Twin is Chloe. Nif, you've never met identical twins. You probably think it's impossible for strangers to confuse them as adults. And you're wrong. And with the same hair color, the same height, the same voice, and almost identical facial features, people who didn't know us well mixed us up constantly. Even family friends occasionally called us by the wrong name. And the difference wasn't our appearance. It was our choices. I became an accountant. And I liked routines, budgets, and quiet weekends. And Chloe loved chaos. Nesh bounced between jobs, relationships, apartments, and excuses. And every time she made a mess, someone else somehow became responsible for cleaning it up. N usually me. And growing up, she learned an important lesson. Nif, she cried first. People believed her. Nif, she smiled afterward. Everyone forgot what she'd done. N by the time we reached adulthood, I had stopped trying to expose her lies. No one listened anyway. Nor parents certainly didn't. N mom always described Chloe as free-spirited. And dad called her misunderstood. N those were nice ways of saying she never accepted consequences. Known. Chloe crashed dad's truck after drinking. Somehow I was criticized for not watching out for my sister. When she borrowed thousands from relatives and never repaid them, everyone agreed she was simply going through a difficult phase. When she stole jewelry from our aunt and pawned it, Mom begged the family not to involve police because Chloe's future shouldn't be ruined over one mistake. One mistake. It was always one mistake. Repeated hundreds of times. Eventually I moved 3 states away. Distance became my form of self-defense. For almost 5 years, life was peaceful. I bought a small townhouse. I built excellent credit. I was promoted twice. I finally felt like I existed as Claire instead of Chloe's responsible twin. I thought the nightmare was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Everything started with a phone call from my credit card company. The representative politely asked whether I had recently purchased nearly $6,000 worth of designer handbags in Miami. I laughed. I lived in Colorado. I hadn't even left the state. They froze my account immediately. I assumed someone had stolen my card number online. Annoying, but manageable. Then another bank called. Then another. Then a financing company. Then an auto lender. By the end of the week, I had discovered someone had opened 4 new credit cards, taken out 2 personal loans, financed luxury furniture, and attempted to lease a sports car. All under my name. All approved using my social security number. Someone even submitted copies of my driver's license. Except, it wasn't actually my driver's license. It looked exactly like mine. Same picture, same birth date, same address. Only one tiny detail had changed. The signature. Instead of mine, it contained Chloe's handwriting. I stared at the document for almost a full minute before realizing what I was looking at. She hadn't stolen my identity. She had become me. Because identical twins share almost every physical characteristic, facial verification software passed every application. Employees checking IDs never questioned it. The woman standing in front of them looked exactly like the photo. Why would they? I immediately filed identity theft reports. The police took statements. The banks opened fraud investigations. I thought things would settle quickly. Instead, they became stranger. A week later, I came home from work and noticed something odd. My living room lamp wasn't where I'd left it. At first I assumed I'd simply forgotten. Then I walked into the kitchen. Every cabinet door stood open. Nothing appeared stolen. Everything was simply moved. My coffee mugs had switched shelves. My spice rack had been rearranged alphabetically. Family photos faced backward. The television remote sat inside the refrigerator. Someone had entered my house. Not to rob me. To let me know they could. Police searched the property. No signs of forced entry. Nothing missing. No fingerprints. The responding officer suggested maybe I'd forgotten. I almost laughed. I live alone. People who live alone know exactly where they leave things. 2 nights later I found the first note. It was taped underneath my windshield wiper. One sentence. You've always been too easy. No signature, no fingerprints. Just neat handwriting. I recognized it immediately. Chloe always dotted the letter I with tiny circles instead of dots. She'd done it since middle school. I showed police. Still not enough evidence. Without cameras or witnesses, it was only my suspicion. I installed security cameras that same afternoon. Every entrance. Every window. Motion sensors. Cloud backup. New locks. Video doorbell. I even placed tiny strips of transparent tape across less used doors before leaving for work. If someone entered, I'd know. 3 days later, one strip had been broken. The cameras showed nothing. I checked the recordings again. Nothing. Then I noticed something impossible. At exactly 2:14 p.m., every camera lost connection for 9 minutes. Every single one. Whoever entered knew exactly how to disable my internet. That wasn't random. That was planned. Inside my bedroom sat another note. I expected better security. No theft. Just another reminder. I barely slept after that. Every noise sounded like footsteps. Every creak made my heart race. N changed alarm companies. N installed cellular backup. N paid for professional monitoring. N bought motion lights. Nothing helped. And because the intruder wasn't after valuables. N she wanted control. And about 2 weeks later, I finally received something from one of the fraud investigators. N copies of surveillance photos. In several stores had photographed the woman making purchases. The investigator apologized. He understood why the case was difficult. And looking at the images felt like staring into a mirror. And it was me. Nor rather. And someone wearing my face. And she smiled directly into one security camera, while carrying nearly $4,000 in designer clothing. And almost as if she knew someone would eventually review the footage. Enlarged the image. Nther it was. A tiny scar above her left eyebrow. Chloe got that scar falling off a bicycle when we were 12. Never had one. Nit was subtle. And barely noticeable. Nb it was enough. And finally, proof. N felt hope for the first time in weeks. Until the investigator called again. N he sounded uncomfortable. N the prosecutor believed the scar wasn't enough to guarantee conviction. And defense attorneys could argue lighting, makeup, image quality. N the evidence was considered suggestive. Not definitive. N I nearly screamed. N someone had stolen over $90,000. Using my identity. N broken into my home repeatedly. N left written messages. And it still wasn't enough. N meanwhile my credit score collapsed. Net collection agencies started calling. A mortgage refinancing became impossible. A promotion requiring financial clearance disappeared overnight. 9 years of careful planning evaporated because one person looked exactly like me. And then came the package. No return address. 9 side sat a framed photo. Nit showed me sleeping in my own bedroom. N taken from only a few feet away. And my blood froze. On the back someone had written, "N you really should lock your windows." Except me never slept with windows open. Ne checked the frame carefully. No fingerprints. And just another message. Another game. Another reminder that someone could reach me whenever she wanted. That night I packed a suitcase and stayed in a hotel. And for the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely afraid my sister wasn't simply stealing money. And she was enjoying watching me unravel. And somehow, the worst was still waiting for me. And the hotel room should have made me feel safe. Instead, I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, replaying one question over and over. How had Chloe gotten into my house? The security company insisted the new alarm system had never been disarmed. The doors showed no signs of forced entry. The windows were locked from the inside. Neither my sister had somehow copied every key I owned, or someone was helping her. Neither possibility helped me sleep. The following morning, I returned home with 2 police officers. Every room looked perfectly normal. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing appeared damaged. But after everything that had happened, normal had become terrifying. None officer suggested replacing every lock again. The other quietly recommended I stay with a friend for a while. Ne appreciated the concern, but I refused. If I abandoned my own home, Chloe would win. That afternoon, I hired a private cybersecurity consultant. And his job wasn't to investigate identity theft. It was to find every digital footprint connected to my name. If Chloe had spent 3 months pretending to be me, she had to have left traces somewhere. The consultant, Eric, warned me the search would take time. He called 2 days later, and his voice sounded unusually serious. And someone had created more than fake credit accounts. And someone had created an entirely fake version of my life. And social media accounts under my name. And shopping memberships. And travel reward programs. And medical appointment requests. And food delivery profiles. And even professional networking accounts. Some had existed for nearly 4 months. They all used different email addresses, different phone numbers, different IP addresses. Yet every profile contained my photos, not stolen from Facebook, private pictures. Photos that had only ever existed on my personal cloud storage. Eric paused before asking an uncomfortable question. Had anyone ever had access to my laptop? I thought back. Only one person. Last Thanksgiving. Mom had invited both of us for dinner. While everyone watched football, Chloe had borrowed my laptop because she claimed she needed to print airline tickets. She had disappeared upstairs for almost 40 minutes. At the time, I hadn't questioned it. Now I realized 40 minutes was more than enough time to copy an entire hard drive. Family photos, tax returns, bank statements, scanned passport, birth certificate, digital copies of every important document. Everything someone would need to become me. I felt physically sick. Eric recommended freezing every credit bureau permanently, changing every password, replacing every device, creating entirely new email accounts, starting over. Again. The bills kept arriving anyway. Collection agencies didn't care that I was the victim. To them, unpaid debt was unpaid debt. Every conversation began politely. Every conversation ended with someone implying I was lying. I kept hearing the same sentence. If this wasn't you, why does every signature match? Because my twin had practiced my handwriting since we were children. She thought it was funny. I remembered finding birthday cards she had signed with my name in high school. Back then, everyone laughed. Now those childhood games had become evidence against me. 3 weeks later, I finally lost my patience. I drove back to my hometown, not to see my parents, to confront Chloe. Except she wasn't there. Her apartment had been emptied. Neighbors told me she had moved out nearly a month earlier. No forwarding address, no employer, no phone number. She had vanished. My parents acted strangely calm when I visited them. Mom insisted Chloe was simply traveling. Dad said she deserved privacy. Neither seemed remotely concerned that their daughter had disappeared while police investigated identity theft involving nearly $100,000. Then I noticed something. On Mom's kitchen counter sat an expensive designer handbag. The exact model purchased using one of the fraudulent credit cards. I recognized it because investigators had shown me surveillance photos. Mom smiled when she noticed me looking. She casually explained Chloe had given it to her as an early birthday present. I asked where Chloe got the money. Mom. She's doing much better lately. My stomach tightened. They knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to accept gifts they couldn't possibly believe she had legitimately purchased. I didn't argue. I simply left. On my drive home, I received another notification from my bank. Someone had attempted to access one of my investment accounts. The login failed because I'd changed passwords. But the attempt came from my hometown. The timing wasn't coincidence. Someone had known I was there. That meant someone had been watching me. Eric dug deeper into the login records. The IP address traced back to a small office building downtown. It housed multiple businesses, including a law office. That discovery made no sense. Until 1 week later, a certified envelope arrived. Inside was a legal demand letter. According to Chloe's attorney, I supposedly owed my sister $126,000. The claim was absurd. The letter alleged Chloe had financially supported me for years. It included spreadsheets showing dozens of electronic transfers, loan agreements, signed acknowledgments, repayment schedules. Every signature belonged to me, except none of them actually did. They were expertly forged. The lawyer demanded immediate repayment or civil litigation would begin. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was insane. My identity had been stolen. My house had been invaded. My credit destroyed. And now my own sister intended to sue me using forged evidence. I immediately called the attorney. He remained professional. He explained he represented his client and believed her documentation appeared legitimate. He politely suggested settling would avoid unnecessary legal expenses. He had no idea he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Because during that conversation, he unknowingly revealed something. He believed Chloe. Completely. Which meant she had convinced him she was the victim. She hadn't merely stolen my identity. She had built an entire legal narrative around it. A story detailed enough to fool licensed professionals. I ended the call without arguing. For the first time since everything began, I stopped reacting. Instead, I started planning. People think revenge begins with anger. Mine began with silence. I made coffee, opened a notebook, and wrote one sentence across the first page. If Chloe wants to prove she's me, I'll help her do it. By the end of that night, I had outlined the first steps of a plan that would take months. A plan that wouldn't just expose her. It would force her to destroy herself. Because there was one thing Chloe had always underestimated. She thought looking like me meant she understood me. She didn't. She understood appearances. She knew nothing about preparation. Nothing about patience. Nothing about accounting. And absolutely nothing about forensic paper trails. She had spent months creating a fake life. I was about to spend mine turning every lie into evidence. She thought she was holding all the cards. She had no idea she had just dealt me the winning hand. I didn't tell anyone about my plan. Not my coworkers. Not my parents. Not even Detective Harris, the officer assigned to my identity theft case. The fewer people who knew what I was doing, the fewer opportunities Chloe would have to adjust. My first step wasn't dramatic.nit, was paperwork.na. As an accountant, I understood something most people ignored. N people lie. Documents don't. Nat least, not when you know where to look. Every fraudulent loan, every credit application, every fake contract my sister had created contained tiny inconsistencies. Nothing obvious. The dates were correct. The account numbers existed. The signatures looked convincing. But every document had been built by someone who copied my life instead of living it. For example, Chloe always forgot one tiny habit I had developed years earlier. Whenever I signed official paperwork, I naturally tilted my signature upward about 5 degrees. Nit wasn't intentional. Nit was muscle memory. Every forged signature stayed perfectly horizontal. Another detail involved my initials. Ni always connected the letters in one continuous movement. Chloe lifted the pen between them. No ordinary person would notice. Na forensic handwriting examiner absolutely would. Na hired one privately. In his report, a loan cost nearly $4,000. Nen worth every penny. Nbi the end of the examination. He'd identified 37 separate indicators proving every signature had been forged. Not possibly forged. Definitely forged. That report became the foundation of everything that followed. Meanwhile, Eric continued digging into Chloe's digital trail. None afternoon. He called sounding almost excited. I think your sister got careless. He explained that one fake email account had automatically synchronized photos to cloud storage. Most had been deleted. None folder remained. 9 side were nearly 300 pictures. No luxury restaurants. No hotel rooms. N shopping trips. Designer stores. N spa weekends. N vacations. N everything purchased using money she'd stolen under my identity. N she documented all of it. None like a travel influencer. She'd even taken selfies, carrying shopping bags beside receipts that investigators had already linked to fraudulent transactions. It was the first time I smiled in weeks. Not because I enjoyed seeing evidence against my sister. Because arrogant people eventually make one mistake. Chloe's mistake was believing she was untouchable. Eric recovered metadata from every image, dates, times, GPS locations, original devices. None of it could easily be altered afterward. The evidence wasn't just useful, it was devastating. Then something even better happened. One evening, while reviewing the recovered files, Eric noticed another folder hidden behind encrypted backups. It contained scanned passports, driver's licenses, social security cards. None belonged to me. There were at least 14 different identities. Some belonged to elderly people. Others belonged to former roommates. One belonged to a man Chloe had briefly dated years ago. She hadn't stolen only my identity. I was simply her biggest project. The case instantly became much larger than family drama. This was organized identity fraud. I contacted Detective Harris immediately. For the first time since the investigation began, his attitude completely changed. He requested copies of everything. Within 48 hours, federal investigators became involved. No one told Chloe. That was intentional. They wanted her relaxed, comfortable, still believing she controlled the narrative. While investigators quietly built their case, Chloe made another move. She filed the civil lawsuit. The complaint arrived on a Tuesday morning. According to her filing, I had borrowed over $120,000 across 5 years. She attached forged bank records, forged repayment schedules, forged text message screenshots, forged emails. She even claimed I'd emotionally manipulated her into supporting me because I had supposedly lost my job years ago. The funniest part? I'd never lost my job. My employment history was public. Continuous and verify.net. Somehow she'd built an entirely fictional version of my life. Reading the lawsuit felt surreal. It was like reading fan fiction written by a narcissist. My attorney laughed. Then he stopped laughing. She's either incredibly stupid, he paused. Or incredibly confident. He was right. And only someone who believed they could never be caught would submit forged evidence directly to a court. And every document entered into litigation became discoverable. And every lie became traceable. And every fake record became another felony. He instructed my attorney not to respond aggressively. Not yet. Instead, we requested additional documentation. Bank transfers. Original contracts. Tax filings. Electronic communications. Anything supporting her claims. We acted as though we genuinely needed time to evaluate her case. The requests weren't designed to defend me. They were designed to make Chloe create even more fake evidence. And she couldn't resist. Within 2 weeks, her lawyer produced hundreds of additional pages. And every single one became another opportunity for forensic experts to dismantle her story. Meanwhile, Eric uncovered something that completely changed the game. He traced one of Chloe's encrypted backups to a storage unit rented under a fake name. The warrant took several days. When investigators finally opened the unit, they expected counterfeit documents. Instead, they found an entire identity theft workshop. Professional printers. Laminating machines. Blank ID templates. Dozens of external hard drives. Stacks of unopened credit cards. Mail from different victims. Luxury goods with original price tags still attached. One wall completely covered with photographs. Mine sat in the center. Surrounded by notes. Addresses. Schedules. Copies of my utility bills. Airline itineraries. My grocery store loyalty card. Photos of my house from different angles. She hadn't simply impersonated me. She had studied me. For months. Detective Harris later admitted even experienced investigators found the room disturbing. It looked less like financial crime and more like obsession. When I saw the evidence photographs, one image caught my attention. Pinned beside my picture was a handwritten sentence. She always gets the life I deserve. Niece stared at those words for a long time. Everything suddenly made sense. This had never been about money. Money was simply the reward. Chloe truly wanted was my life. My stable career. My clean reputation. My excellent credit. My peaceful home. She believed I had stolen those things from her merely by making better choices. Instead of building her own future, she decided stealing mine was easier. Then fate handed me something I never expected. The court scheduled mandatory mediation before the lawsuit could proceed. Meaning Chloe and I would be sitting in the same room for the first time in nearly a year. Attorney asked whether I wanted to request a virtual appearance. Niece said no. Wanted to look my sister in the eyes. Not because I missed her. Because I wanted to see whether she still believed she was winning. Niche walked into the mediation room wearing an expensive cream-colored suit that I knew she couldn't afford. Niche looked confident. Relaxed. Almost amused. Her lawyer carried 3 thick binders of evidence. Mine carried 1 slim folder. That was enough to make Chloe smile. Nishi mistook preparation for weakness. She had no idea the thickest evidence against her wasn't in my attorney's hands. Nit was already sitting inside sealed evidence lockers at the federal building. She was about to spend the next few hours digging herself even deeper. The mediation was held in a conference room on the 7th floor of the county courthouse. Neutral walls. A long wooden table. And a coffee machine humming quietly in the corner. Everything about the room was designed to keep emotions under control. It didn't work. The moment Chloe walked in, I realized she hadn't changed at all. She wore confidence like expensive perfume. She smiled at everyone. She greeted the mediator warmly. She even asked my attorney how his morning had been. If someone had walked into the room without knowing the case, they would have assumed she was the reasonable one. That had always been her greatest talent. She didn't just lie. She performed. When her lawyer began presenting the case, Chloe kept glancing toward me with tiny, satisfied smiles. Every few minutes she scribbled something on a notepad. I couldn't see what she was writing. I didn't care. My attorney barely spoke. He simply listened. Asked for clarification. Requested copies of a few documents. Nothing confrontational, nothing emotional. I could practically feel Chloe becoming more confident with every passing minute. Finally, the mediator turned toward me. He asked whether I wanted to respond. I calmly slid one envelope across the table. Inside was the forensic handwriting report. Nothing else. The mediator spent several minutes reading it. His expression changed almost to examine it. His expression changed almost immediately. He flipped through the pages again. Then once more. He looked at Chloe. She avoided eye contact for the first time that day. The report identified dozens of unique inconsistencies across every signature she had submitted. Pressure variations, stroke direction, pen lifts, natural writing rhythm, microscopic hesitation marks. None of those things could be convincingly copied by someone tracing another person's handwriting. Her attorney quietly asked for a short break. Everyone stepped outside except Chloe. She remained seated, looking down at the table. When her attorney returned, he spoke much more carefully. He asked whether we would consider settling privately. Not because he suddenly believed I owed Chloe money, because he realized something was terribly wrong with his client's evidence. My attorney politely declined. Instead, he handed over another document. A timeline comparing every alleged loan Chloe claimed she had given me. One entry immediately stood out. According to her records, she had transferred me $12,000 on March 18th. There was just one problem. She had been in Mexico that week. We knew because she had posted vacation photos. The metadata from her own cloud backup confirmed the exact location. The bank branch she claimed to have visited was over 1,000 miles away. Her lawyer frowned. He turned another page. Then another. More problems. She claimed to have signed one agreement inside a restaurant. Security footage from the restaurant proved it had been closed for renovations that entire month. She claimed another payment occurred on a Sunday. The bank she listed wasn't even open on Sundays. Tiny mistakes. Harmless individually. Catastrophic together. For the first time, I watched confidence disappear from Chloe's face. Not fear. Not yet. Confusion. She genuinely hadn't expected anyone to verify her story. The mediation ended without agreement. As everyone packed their files, Chloe finally looked directly at me. Her smile returned. Only this time it looked forced. As we walked toward the elevator, she slowed until we were briefly alone. Without looking at me, she quietly said that I should stop before things became ugly. I didn't answer. I simply stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. She never realized the hallway camera had recorded the entire interaction. Those few seconds became surprisingly important later. The following Monday, federal agents executed search warrants at 3 different locations connected to Chloe. Her apartment. The storage unit. A small office she had rented under another name. They seized computers, phones, printers, financial records, counterfeit identification equipment, and dozens of unopened packages addressed to people she'd never met. The news spread quickly through our hometown. Friends started calling. Old classmates sent messages asking whether the rumors were true. I ignored almost everyone. Then my mother called. She sounded furious. Not at Chloe. At me. She demanded to know why federal agents had embarrassed the family. She insisted siblings shouldn't involve the government in private disagreements. Private disagreements. That phrase almost made me laugh. Someone had committed identity theft against multiple victims, committed fraud, forgery, burglary, wire fraud, tax fraud, and somehow my mother still believed the real issue was that people were talking. She begged me to make everything disappear. She said Chloe was scared. She said prison would destroy her life. I finally asked one question. Did she ever worry about destroying mine? Silence. Long enough to tell me everything. Then she quietly admitted something I had suspected for weeks. She had known Chloe was using my identity. Not every detail, but enough. Months earlier, Chloe had confessed she was borrowing my excellent credit because banks treated her unfairly. Mom believed it would all be repaid eventually. She chose not to tell me because she didn't want another argument between her daughters. That confession changed everything. Until then, I had seen my parents as enablers. Now they had become witnesses. Maybe even accessories after the fact. My attorney immediately advised me to stop discussing the case with them. Every phone call could become evidence. Every admission mattered. A week later, discovery officially began. That was when both sides were required to exchange evidence before trial. Chloe's lawyer requested every financial document I possessed. We happily complied. Then we requested the devices used to create her contracts. The original electronic files. The computers. The drafts. The editing history. Her lawyer claimed those files had accidentally been deleted. Unfortunately for Chloe, federal investigators had already recovered them. Every version. Every edit. Every deleted draft. The metadata showed exactly who created each document. Exactly when. Exactly which computer had been used. The author's name embedded inside nearly every file wasn't mine. It was Chloe's. Some documents even contained forgotten revision comments. One note simply read, "Fix Claire's signature later." Another said, "Need better date." A third read, "Don't forget fake transfer receipt." She had left herself reminders. Digital fingerprints that no jury would ever ignore. When my attorney received copies from the federal investigators, he called me immediately. I could hear him laughing before he even spoke. After 30 years in law, he said he'd never seen someone manufacture evidence so carelessly. Then he became serious. He told me to prepare. Because once Chloe's legal team reviewed those files, one of two things would happen. Either they would withdraw the lawsuit immediately, or Chloe would fire them and represent herself. Given everything he'd learned about my sister's personality, he wasn't sure which outcome was more likely. I had a feeling I already knew. Chloe had spent her entire life believing she was the smartest person in every room. People like that rarely admitted defeat. They doubled down. And every time they doubled down, they buried themselves even deeper. 2 weeks later, Chloe fired her attorney. Apparently, he had advised her to withdraw the lawsuit immediately and negotiate a plea deal in the criminal investigation. She called him a coward. She accused him of siding with me. Then she filed paperwork announcing she would represent herself. When my attorney read the notice, he leaned back in his chair and quietly said, "Well, she just ended her own case." He wasn't exaggerating. The first hearing after that was almost painful to watch. Chloe walked into the courtroom, carrying 3 oversized binders, convinced they contained enough evidence to destroy me. She spoke confidently. She interrupted the judge several times. She insisted everyone had been manipulated by me. Then the judge asked a simple question. "Did you personally create these financial records?" She answered yes. That single word changed everything. Because the moment she admitted creating the documents herself, every forensic report became directly relevant. My attorney stood and calmly presented the metadata recovered from her computer. Every contract, every fake bank statement, every fabricated text message, every edited PDF. The timestamps showed the documents had been created months after the dates they supposedly represented. Some had even been edited the night before she filed the lawsuit. The courtroom became completely silent. Chloe tried to explain that the files had merely been reorganized. Then my attorney introduced another exhibit, recovered autosave files. Word processors automatically save drafts every few minutes. Those drafts showed the evolution of each forged document. One version contained blank signature lines. Another showed copied signatures pasted into place. A later version corrected spelling mistakes. The final version matched the evidence she had submitted to the court. There was no explanation for that. The judge looked genuinely disappointed, not angry, disappointed. He asked Chloe whether she understood the seriousness of submitting fabricated evidence to a court. She continued insisting she was the victim. She claimed I had hacked her computer. She claimed investigators had altered the files. She claimed the experts were biased. Every explanation became more unbelievable than the last. Finally, the judge dismissed her lawsuit with prejudice. She would never be allowed to file the same claim again. Then he referred the matter to the district attorney for possible criminal contempt and additional fraud charges. She walked out of the courtroom still insisting she had won. Reality simply hadn't reached her yet. 3 months later, the criminal trial began. The prosecution didn't need dramatic speeches. The evidence spoke for itself. Former victims testified. Bank investigators testified. Digital forensic analysts testified. Handwriting experts testified. Detective Harris spent nearly an entire day explaining how the investigation had uncovered a network of stolen identities, fraudulent loans, forged government documents, and financial crimes spanning several years. Then came my turn. I didn't insult Chloe. I didn't cry. I simply described what it felt like to wake up every morning wondering what part of my life had been stolen overnight. How I lost professional opportunities because my credit collapsed. How I stopped sleeping after finding photographs of myself taken inside my own home. How I questioned every locked door and every unfamiliar sound. The prosecutor never needed to ask whether I hated my sister. That wasn't the point. The point was that someone had decided another person's life was easier to steal than building one of her own. When the jury saw the wall of photographs recovered from the storage unit, several jurors visibly reacted. One woman quietly shook her head. Another looked down at the table. The room felt heavier than it had all week. The prosecution saved the strongest piece of evidence for last. A hidden folder recovered from Chloe's laptop contained a private journal. She had never intended anyone else to read it. Among hundreds of entries, one sentence appeared again and again. If I can't have her life, I'll become her. There was no innocent explanation for those words. After less than 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty on identity theft. Guilty on burg fraud. Guilty on forgery. Guilty on burglary. Guilty on multiple counts of financial fraud. The sentencing hearing took place 6 weeks later. The judge described the crimes as unusually calculated. Noted that the financial damage alone exceeded $100,000. But what disturbed him most wasn't the money. Was the sustained psychological campaign. Breaking into someone's home repeatedly. Moving belongings. None leaving notes. Taking photographs while they slept. Those weren't acts of financial desperation. They were acts of intimidation. He sentenced Chloe to several years in state prison, ordered substantial restitution, and permanently prohibited her from contacting me directly or indirectly after her release. Nenge looked at me once before deputies led her away. For the first time in our lives, she had nothing to say. Nen smiled. No excuse. No performance. And just silence. The story didn't end there. None afternoon. Nearly a year later, I received another phone call. It wasn't from a lawyer. It wasn't from a detective. It was from one of the banks that had originally accused me of owing the fraudulent debt. They informed me every account had been cleared. My credit score had been fully restored. Interest charges were erased. Late payments removed. Every fraudulent record deleted. Months later, I was promoted to senior financial controller. Ironically, one reason my company cited was how professionally I had handled an extraordinarily complex fraud investigation. Eventually sold the townhouse where Chloe had secretly entered so many times. Not because I was afraid. Because I no longer wanted to live inside a place filled with memories of looking over my shoulder. Bought a small house with a garden. The first thing I planted wasn't flowers. It was a maple tree. Something that would take years to grow. Something built patiently. The exact opposite of everything Chloe had ever chosen. Nas for my parents. Our relationship never truly recovered. They apologized countless times after the trial, especially after seeing evidence they had never imagined existed. I accepted the apology. I didn't rebuild the trust. Some things can be forgiven without being restored. Looking back, people often ask whether sending my own twin sister to prison was difficult. The truth surprises them. I never sent her there. Every fake signature, every stolen identity, every fraudulent loan, every note she left inside my home, every lie she told under oath, every piece of forged evidence she willingly handed to the court. Those were the bricks. She built the prison herself. All I did was stop standing in front of the door.